can tell you a lot of lies just to make you happy. But
She was Hitler's sister-in-law, yet she wasn't in the bunker when the regime fell. While the Third Reich burned and its leaders died in a final act of destruction beneath Berlin, Gretel Braun lived. She gave birth days after Hitler's death, raised a child under a name now synonymous with horror, and vanished into post-war anonymity. But decades later, whispers surfaced. Had she spoken before her death in 1987? Did she reveal what really happened in those final days? The kind of truth that history books couldn't capture. For someone so close to the epicenter of Nazi power, to Eva Braun, wife to SS General Fegelein, Gretel's silence was deafening, and in that silence, a mythology grew. The question that lingers isn't just what she knew, but why she never told. Or did she? In a world where conspiracy often replaces fact, where myth outlives memory, Gretel Braun has become a shadowy figure, one foot in history, the other in legend. This is not just a story about what happened in the Vorbunker. It's about the haunting possibility that someone outside of it may have known more than anyone inside ever dared say. As the Nazi regime collapsed in the spring of 1945, Berlin became a city of smoke, rubble, and final decisions. Soviet forces closed in, artillery thundered overhead, and deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler sealed himself in a concrete tomb with a shrinking circle of loyalists. In those final days, paranoia replaced strategy. Cyanide capsules were handed out like party favors, and even hope had long since fled. The Vorbunker, once a command post, had become a morgue in waiting. Within its walls, Hitler paced, raged, and trembled, while Eva Braun, ever devoted, stayed by his side, to the bitter end. On April 30th, they died together by Tarm, according to the accepted record, leaving behind a crumbling empire and a trail of death. But not everyone close to them was there. Gretel Braun, Eva's younger sister, was far from Berlin. Married to SS General Hermann Fegelein, a man executed on Hitler's orders just days before. Gretel was heavily pregnant and in hiding. She gave birth less than a week after Hitler's death. She wasn't in the bunker, but she was connected to it in every way that mattered. And decades later, people began asking, did she carry the real story with her? Or were the facts already clear? Just too ordinary for the myths we wanted to believe. Gretel Braun was born in Munich on August 31, 1915, the youngest of three sisters in a conservative Catholic household. Her early life, like that of her sister Eva, was unremarkable, marked by modest education, traditional family values, and a growing fascination with photography and aesthetics. It was this shared interest that eventually led both sisters into the orbit of Adolf Hitler. While Eva became Hitler's mistress, then, in the final hours of the regime, his wife Gretel remained largely in the background, a quieter figure moving through the same privileged but secretive world. She was not politically vocal, not ideologically prominent, but proximity alone was enough to draw her into the heart of the Nazi elite. By the early 1940s, as Eva Braun was firmly embedded in Hitler's private world, Gretel's own trajectory aligned with the regime's inner circle. In June 1944, she married SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, a decorated officer and Heinrich Himmler's trusted liaison to Hitler. The marriage was held at Hitler's mountain retreat, the Berghof, and attended by the Nazi High Commandant. Event less about love and more about symbolism. With that wedding, Gretel Braun became part of the machinery. She wasn't a decision maker, but she was now family. Her identity became inseparable from the Reich's unraveling. Even if she remained a quiet figure in its violent spectacle. The marriage between Gretel Braun and Hermann Fegelein in June 1944 was staged as a celebration, but its true function was political. Held at the Berghof with Hitler himself reportedly giving the bride away, the wedding served as a public display of unity within the Nazi elite. Fegelein was no minor figure in SS Gruppenführer, a trusted link between Heinrich Himmler and Hitler's inner circle, and now, by marriage, a member of Hitler's extended family. The union elevated Gretel's status and cemented Fegelein's influence at a time when Nazi Germany was beginning to unravel under the weight of military defeats. Whether the marriage was driven by love, ambition, or convenience remains unclear, but its consequences would be brutal. By April 1945, the facade had crumbled. As Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, Fegelein attempted to flee caught in civilian clothing, drunk, and carrying foreign currency and fake documents. It was clear he intended to escape the dying regime. Arrested by SS forces and brought back to the bunker, he was condemned by Hitler for desertion and suspected betrayal. Even pleas from Eva Braun, who begged on her sister's behalf, couldn't change the outcome. Fegelein was executed, likely in the Chancellery garden or basement, his death swift and unsanctioned, by trial. For Gretel, it meant widowhood, disgrace, and isolation, all while heavily pregnant. In a matter of days, she lost her husband, her sister, and the regime that had defined her adult life. As Berlin collapsed in flames and Hitler's inner circle vanished into death or capture, Gretel Braun remained far from the bunker that would define the end of the Nazi era. She was likely in Bavaria, sheltered at the Berghof or nearby Salzburg, heavily pregnant and cut off from the chaos overtaking the capital. Her husband had been executed by Hitler's direct orders. Her sister had chosen to die beside the Führer, and the regime that had elevated her to the highest social circles of Nazi Germany had fallen to ruin. She was alone, widowed, disgraced by association, and burdened by a legacy she had no power to escape. On May 5, 1945, just 5 days after Hitler's suicide and the official death of the Reich, Gretel gave birth to a daughter. She named her Eva Barbara, a gesture both deeply personal and tragically symbolic. The name honored her sister, who had died alongside Hitler, and perhaps also sought to preserve a memory before it was swallowed by collective shame. But the child's life would be shaped as much by burden as by blood. Born into a world that no longer had a place for the remnants of the Nazi elite, Eva Barbara inherited not privilege, but the crushing weight of her family's legacy. For Gretel, the collapse of the Third Reich wasn't just political, it was intimate, immediate, and inescapable. She had survived, but the world she had known was irretrievably gone. On the chaotic aftermath of the war, Gretel Braun disappeared into the margins. Unlike high-profile figures captured, tried, or interrogated, she faced no public reckoning. Her connection to Hitler through her sister and her executed husband was undeniable. But she had played no formal political role, signed no orders, and appeared in no propaganda. She became one of many who slipped into post-war obscurity, aided by a new identity and the silence of a society trying to rebuild. For years, little is known about her life. She raised her daughter quietly, avoiding attention, never granting interviews, never writing a memoir. Her name faded from headlines, but not from the shadows of history. That quiet life was shattered again in 1971. Her daughter, Eva Barbara, died by suicide at just 26 years old. The cause was never publicly discussed. But those close to the story describe a young woman struggling under the dual burden of a name and a legacy. Gretel had already lost her husband to betrayal and execution, her sister to fanatic loyalty, and now, her only child to despair. It was a trilogy of losses that few could survive without being hollowed out. This long silence, marked not by secrecy but by personal devastation, became the breeding ground for myth. As years passed and Gretel continued to say nothing, speculation filled the void. She must have known something. She must have told someone. But in truth, her refusal to speak may have had nothing to do with hidden truths, and everything to do with grief too large to name. In the decades following Gretel Braun's death in 1987, a curious transformation began. Despite leaving behind no interviews, memoirs, or written statements, she slowly emerged as a central figure in fringe theories and internet folklore. YouTube videos with ominous music claimed she had made a deathbed confession. Online forums whispered of a hidden diary or a long-suppressed interview. Tabloid articles recycled the same unverified claims that Gretel knew the truth about Hitler's final moments, that she had heard secrets no one else dared speak, and that before dying, she finally revealed everything. These stories were often vague, unsourced, and contradicted by the historical record, but that didn't stop them from spreading. In reality, there is no evidence, none, that Gretel Braun ever gave a final confession. No document, no recording, no credible witness account has ever surfaced to support the claim. Historians with access to post-war intelligence archives and interviews with surviving bunker staff have found nothing linking her to any alternate version of events. But the myth persists because it fills a space that facts cannot. Gretel's proximity to Hitler, her silence, and her survival all invite speculation. In the public imagination, silence is never just silence, it's a void waiting to be filled. And in that void, people project whatever story they want to believe. The allure isn't in what Gretel said. It's in what she might have said, if only someone had been there to hear it. There's something deeply unsatisfying about how the story of Adolf Hitler ends. A dictator responsible for millions of deaths takes his own life in a bunker, shielded from the judgment of the world. There's no trial, no confrontation, no final moment of reckoning, just poison, a gunshot, and fire. For many, that conclusion feels incomplete, even unjust. We want a narrative that delivers clarity, closure, even punishment. And when history doesn't provide that, myth rushes in to fill the gap. That's why alternate endings theories of escape, betrayal, or hidden truth persist. They offer the illusion of deeper meaning, of something withheld that, if only uncovered, would finally make sense of the horror. Figures like Gretel Braun become ideal vessels for this longing. She was close to the center of power, but far enough removed to remain mysterious. She didn't testify, didn't speak publicly, didn't contradict the official version. She simply vanished into the silence. And so, she becomes a blank canvas. Onto her, people project secrets, conspiracies, and the possibility that the history we know is only the surface. It's not about Gretel herself. It's about what her silence represents. A gap in the record, a shadow where someone wishes there were light. In truth, We aren't looking for Gretel Braun's story, we're looking for an alternate version of our own understanding, one that gives the past more shape, more drama, more control. But history, in its most honest form, rarely cooperates. It ends quietly, unceremoniously, and often with more questions than answers. That discomfort is where the myth lives. Not because there's more to know, but because we need there to be. Despite the fog of myth that surrounds Hitler's final days, the actual historical record is strikingly clear. Survivors of the Vorbunker, including Hitler's personal secretary, Trottel Jung, his valet Heinz Linge, Adjutant Otto Gunsch, and others gave detailed, overlapping accounts of the last weeks of the regime. Their testimonies were recorded in post-war interrogations, memoirs, and court proceedings. They describe Hitler as a broken man, trembling, paranoid, physically deteriorating, and increasingly disconnected from reality. They recount Eva Braun's calm loyalty, the distribution of cyanide capsules, and the grim atmosphere that settled over the underground bunker as the Third Reich fell apart. These are not tales built on speculation. They are first-hand, consistent, and often chilling in their specificity. Soviet investigators, who arrived at the Chancellery shortly after Berlin's fall, recovered remains later, identified through dental analysis as belonging to Hitler and Eva Braun. Western intelligence agencies, though initially skeptically, eventually accepted these findings, especially as more eyewitnesses emerged and more documents were declassified. Allied reports, German military records, and independent post-war investigations all converge on the same conclusion. Hitler and Braun died by suicide on April 30, 1945. Their bodies were burned, as Hitler had ordered, and the regime ended in a bunker beneath the ruins of Berlin. There is no credible evidence to suggest otherwise. No verified witness has ever contradicted this version. No diary, tape, or document has surfaced to challenge it. The truth, while uncomfortable, is already known. It's just less cinematic than the stories we invent to replace it. The Nazi regime, unlike most defeated powers, didn't just leave behind ruins, it left behind a mythology. Decades after the war, names like Hitler, Himmler, and Bormann still evoke an aura of dark fascination, not only for their atrocities but for the obsessive speculation that surrounds their ends. Conspiracies of escape became their own subgenre. Stories of Hitler fleeing to Argentina, Martin Bormann living under an alias in South America, or secret U-boat passages to Antarctica took root almost immediately after the war. These tales weren't just fringe ramblings, they appeared in books, films, documentaries, and were often repeated with a knowing wink by popular media. The fantasy that the story isn't over, that someone got away, that some truth was buried, became part of the narrative itself. And in that climate of post-war myth-making, silence was treated not as absence but as implication. Gretel Braun, who never gave interviews, never defended herself, and never challenged the historical consensus, was reimagined as someone who must have known more. Her refusal to speak publicly wasn't interpreted as grief, trauma, or a desire for was cast as concealment. That silence became fuel for speculation, the perfect gap into which conspiracy theories could pour. Television specials, clickbait articles, and YouTube channels all found utility in her name. Hitler's sister-in-law reveals all was a headline, ready to go. Never mind that no revelation existed. The idea of someone that close to Hitler who lived on in quiet anonymity was too tempting to leave alone. And so Gretel Braun, a woman shaped by loss and erasure, was repurposed as a cipher for secrets she never actually revealed. The myths need her not because of what she did, but because of what she didn't do. Speak.ChatGPT said, Gretel Braun's life was shaped not by secrets, but by loss. Her husband, Hermann Fegelein, was executed by Hitler's orders, accused of betrayal at the war's bitter end. Her sister, Eva Braun, chose to die beside Hitler in the bunker, sealing herself to a regime that was already burning. Then, in 1971, Gretlo's only daughter, Eva Barbara, died by suicide at the age of 26. These were not the losses of a distant political heir. They were intimate, immediate, and irreversible. Gretel outlived them all. She lived through the fall of a regime, the death of her family, and the moral collapse of everything she had once stood next to, and she never said a word about it. Her silence, so often framed as suspicious, was almost certainly something else, personal. It wasn't protecting secrets, it was protecting pain. In a world eager to dissect her every connection, to make her a symbol of hidden truths or unspeakable knowledge, Gretel Braun refused to participate. That refusal wasn't a confession, it was a boundary. And yet, by remaining silent, she became a target of myth. In a cruel irony, the quieter she stayed, the louder the conspiracy theories grew around her. People decided she had something to hide, not because there was evidence, but because the absence of evidence was too uncomfortable to accept. To mythologize someone like Gretel Braun is to erase the ordinary tragedy of her life. It replaces grief with intrigue and humanity with plot points. But maybe the real story isn't one of secrets at all. Maybe it's about a woman who survived the collapse of everything she knew, and chose, in the end, not to explain it to the world, not because she had something to hide but because she had too much to carry. History is not obligated to satisfy our hunger for secrets. Sometimes, the truth is not hidden, it's just painful, mundane, or unbearably real. Gretel Braun's life doesn't offer a revelation, it offers a reminder that survival can be silent, that loss doesn't need commentary, and that not every person near power holds a key to deeper truth. We project myths onto the quiet because we're uncomfortable with finality, with facts that don't unfold like stories. But silence isn't always concealment. Sometimes, it's all that's left. Gretel Braun was not a missing chapter in the history of the Third Reich. She was a footnote, quiet, forgotten, and surviving in the long shadow of a world that destroyed itself. And that, too, is worth remembering.